Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to SP Reviews, where today I'll be reviewing the entirety of an album by Pravi Lopov titled Forsaken 3000. And if we switch over to here, we have ourselves a track on the screen. This album, I've reviewed a little bit of Pravi Lopov's work before. I've reviewed songs Model as well as Warrior, so it's good to be able to check out a sort of a bigger kind of concept like this. I'll just make it, you can see the whole thing in this, and I apologize for having the record label ILOU from Tokyo, Japan out here. I apologize for the logo not being visible. This is a 10-track album. It's a long-form piece, and I'm excited to learn more about it. Forsaken 3000 tells a sci-fi story about a divided human race. Only a small number of privileged citizens live in a spaceship that floats above the Earth. The rest is left behind on the polluted ground, living in tunnel systems and underground cities, enduring never-ending sandstorms and toxic air, and following the advices of itinerant preachers wandering the dead desert with no fare but their heads burned to insanity. So yeah, I'm going to be listening through this album from start to finish. Just so you're aware before we get into it, this is going to be a slightly different album review. I'm going to be aiming to focus on kind of like the points of the review during the listening time where I actually have stuff to say. So there'll be less of the sections where like I'm just kind of listening, if that makes sense. It's just going to be parts where I point stuff out or stuff relevant to the review. Obviously, if you want to check out the album in full, you're more than welcome to go to Pravi Lopov's Bandcamp or ILOU Records there and check it out for yourself. Without further ado, we're going to check through this album from start to finish and hear what we think. Let's go, starting with The Flying City. Track number 1. Phenomenal dynamic range off the bat. Look how quiet it is, dude. It's a little bit unsettling with some of those muffled voice layers and the synths. Kind of like a choir, isn't it? Like soprano with vocal chops. There's a lot of space within this track. We're really not rushing to get into the most, engaging part of it. It's very much trying to establish an ambience and atmosphere here that I think is great for an intro.
Everything's white. There is no pain. Only love and pleasure.
Only love and pleasure.
But I can help myself. Something's wrong.
Dun dun dun. Synth come in, very dramatic. Interesting filtering in our attack on the envelopes of that in regards to the response. But just something is wrong. Bam, drama, great. Sets the scene really well. Lets you know, even if everything appears all hunky-dory, it's not necessarily the case. I love the detail of the textures of the synth parts here. I think it's great to have the quality of the audio here, and it's clear to me that these aren't presets or anything like that. This is stuff that Pravi Lopov is finding for themselves. Like the rate of the oscillation being kind of muddled with the panning of the synth in the stereo field. It's fantastic. And just the general radio static we have now is very dramatic. And the filtering into that low mid-range. Wonderful. A lot going on there. The Flying City. The person in that city going, hey, everything's all good up here, but even it's not necessarily correct. So if it's kind of average up there in paradise, utopia, what's going to be like down below? This is Seeker in the Dark, track number 2. Kind of nice just to have the constant reliable thud of that filtered bass drum with some very, very light sub layers of synth pads in their left side there. Some kind of uncomfortable vocal modulations there. Or some chops. Yeah, very ambient, very ominous. Emptiness is referring more to the bottom, how things are just... There's like a sense of hopelessness,
Stars. Sparkle. Life is short. Life is fragile.
Life is fragile. Yeah, it's really great vocal modulation, by the way. Very different to what we had previously.
Love glow. My eyes hurt. I can't see.
Great development of these hi-hats here as well. And then they get taken away again. Like, that's some really interesting automation volume-wise on the post-production. So I think this is sort of talking about the actual life quality, the expectancy of the person in that lower area, you know. I was about to say it sounds kind of mutated or demonic. It's a very ferocious kind of feral sound to that distortion there, that modulation, but I kind of dig it. It's the state of the person at the bottom there, just getting completely mucked up by everything, you know? Almost like they're losing their humanity in the process.
Eyes hurt. I can't see.
Seeker in the dark, I assume they're blind then. They're looking around in the dark to try and find, but they'll never because their eyes aren't, you know. It's very bleak stuff, to be fair. It's very heavy subject matter. It's a very strong, ambitious subject to make an album about, but I am nonetheless thankful for it because I think that from what I've heard of Pravi Lopov, they're capable of making music that would regard that. This is a bigger idea though, and I like that we've got almost a cinematic, dramatic feel to it. There's very little going on in the arrangement. It's very minimalist. Like, you have this percussion coming here with the whoosh of like a riser. The noise synth is strong in this one. Great samples to the percussion, by the way. I like the airiness of them. The resonance is an interesting tone in amongst everything else. Ah, an alternative lead synth now. Carrying us out with a demented sort of melody on top. The Call of the Damned, you know. Have we got a string instrument in there as well? Like, how many different layers are we going to put in here? I suppose you get away with it because you've got sub layers and dominant ones. You know, there's depth to the mix, which I appreciate because not having everything at face value allows things to kind of float and you get lost within it. There's a sense of dread and sadness to it. They're all the same. You got the story of them being I'll never see. They're just trying to find a way out of this mess, the situation they're in down below. I can't imagine like an Armageddon situation like this, eh? I mean, like, it's not even necessarily sci-fi nowadays. You have really wealthy people that are wanting to go out and build like colonies on like the moon and Mars and stuff like that. Sci-fi is slowly predicting what is going to happen in future. It's kind of wild. But nonetheless, a great track. It was nice to have more of a long form piece from Pravi, and I think that they did well here to tell the story they needed to. It was very emotionally intense and charged, but I think there was no filler within it. You know, 6.5 minutes. And now we've got a short time rift at 2 p.m. Track number 3. It's nice just to have one instrument start off, by the way. I cannot understate the value of minimalism, especially when you've instantiated a sense of expanse in previous arrangements. Going down to one track, especially when I know that Pravi Lopov from previous works can like actually layer really effectively within compositions. It can be powerful just to have that one instrument there. Not just as contrast, but you see that depth from that extension there. You don't need 5 instruments to tell you that. Complicated triads with maybe some additions within that. It insinuates a continuation of the nothingness that the previous tracks have given. Like, we've had people tell their sides of the story, both in the top and the bottom layers of like the world that Pravi Lopov is constructing, but at the same time, you just get this sense of distance with it. They really are worlds apart. And it's, I think it is deceptive in how simple it is. Because it's actually, you may not be aware of this listening to this, it's not easy to play music like this or to write it. For one, I think it's relatively free-form in it. We're not constructing it to suit within traditional sort of verse-chorus structures. It's through composed. But also, what's cool about it is that you are left waiting, like lots of pregnant pauses, waiting for that next note to come in, and there's almost a gamble on whether it's going to be worth the wait or not. But every time, like those are maybe ninths or something like that, 7ths or 9ths there, the brightness of it is like, hey, there is some positivity to this, but it's also a little bit bittersweet and maybe melancholic at the same time. This entire like ambience of this track there. It's probably a good soundtrack for being in space. Do you know what I mean? Like, because there's nothing in space. It's just having this looking out the cosmos for the amount of light years you are before you go back into cryostasis. It's fascinating stuff. We're gonna fade out there to finish it off, which is rather respectable if I may say so myself. Nothing wrong with a good fade out. Nothing wrong with a good fade out. Just to let you know that that continuation of that nothingness is going to be forever. A loop will repeat again, but we got Secret in the Light, track number 4. And it's 8-minute track, so it'll be interesting to see what we do with this long form factor. I mean, I do like the use of the synth sequence we have here. It's a little bit closer to some of the music I've heard from Pravi Lopov in the past, but I've already lost track of where the start of the bar begins and where the end of it is, if that makes sense. That's the beauty of this music, you can get lost in it, and sometimes it's better just to not try and find yourself. It's better just to let the music carry you instead. In very subtle layers on top. Great filtering of that low-end sequencer to try and make more space, frequency rise for the synths as a sub-layer. And the mid-high range accent. There we go. Letting those kicks come in. That chord note groove moving us forward. A little bit of, yeah, there we go. The hi-hats and the snares. It's interesting, kick, snare, kick, da-da-da, kick, snare. Because a lot of the time people just go kick, snare. But if we're wanting to sort of get stuck in the listener's head, we have to do something slightly different than what's normal. To make the listener go, oh! That's a way of doing it, is to change the way the snares sound, or... I mean, the kicks are a little bit tricky because the kicks are the center point of here, they're the focal point. There's kicks by themselves and with the snares. But the snares have a bit more flexibility because they're not like bass layer. The snares are almost subdominant to the groove. Occasional plucked filters there with a bit of modulation, a bit of an LP final kind of like filter on them. Oh yeah, there we go, bring them forward. Switching around, but automation of panning there. Yeah, great job. It didn't... Nah, I'm not sure what's being said there. It's harder for me to understand than that it is with the previous parts. I like the sound of it though. I like the fact that it's pitched in an upper register so that it sits nicely on top of the mix. And it's a catchy melody as well, which gets stuck in people's heads. And the combination of the basses, the drums, the hi-hat groove as well on top of there. And the string pads as well in the background are dope. Misty ambient feel on the sides. Bringing in that extra synth sequence here, picking it up into the high range there. It's a, what is that, Moog or something like that? And just, we're stopping now. Through composed at 808. Different sections at 8 minutes 8. Because that's basically a track. Well, I don't know if you're aware of this. We just had a track just then. That was the entirety of the length of a typical track up until that point, and it flew by, didn't it? Isn't that crazy? That's cool, good songwriting. It's nice to have like a pan flutish kind of melody over the top though. I think that's really pretty. Very simple melody there. It harmonizes nicely with everything else, but it's just a sense of space, which I think is important at this point, especially after we had the first kind of major kind of like chord note groove of the set. The portamento, oh, snap. So we're layering that on top of what was previously instantiated now, that main sort of drop groove. Yep, great development. No complaints. It's something like If I Can't Just Take You. If I Just Can't Take You. In You Too? Nah, I'm missing that mid part and it's a little bit frustrating, but that's mostly just because hang on. Waters in You Too? Offspring of the Waters in You Too? I'm not sure. I don't think I have that. that's the problem, is that I'm second guessing myself because I'm not just doing Occam's razor, which is if I hear words, there's a chance it's right. Do you know what I mean? That's brains for you, man. You'll hear something and then you'll kind of gaslight yourself into thinking you haven't heard it when you literally heard it. It's just silly stuff. But outside of me not understanding those parts in the upper ranges, I did like how they went boof, boof, boof though in the panning of those higher vocal parts. So I think that was a cool kind of idea. But I'm doing a happy wiggle at the moment because I'm really happy with what we've had so far. I like the fact that we've got space within this composition. We're not needing to rush to the next thing, you know? We're patient with our development and our progression through a track. We're okay with having sections of... Oh yeah, bringing that... Yeah. I don't think we needed to change the percussion in this part. I think that having it constant like that was a smart move. And because of how much of a minimalist kind of approach we have with having it in there in the first place, like we don't have it there often. In fact, for the most part, we haven't had a set percussive groove for most of it. When it comes in, you know what you've got, and it's kind of like a happy place. But I do think that upper sort of synthly with the portamento on top was a smart move because it just allowed us to kind of soar alongside it. I can't believe we're 4 tracks through, and that was an 8-minute track, but honestly it did not feel like that. And it felt as if it was like several different tracks within one because of the fact that it was structured in different sections, in my opinion. But I don't necessarily mind that at all. You know, I think that that's a good use of time if you're into it. But anyways, we've got Traveling Above the Dust Storms. There's a few longer tracks in here, but I don't mind that as long as there is enough to keep me entertained throughout. Kicks, buddy. Is there a polyrhythm? Is there a polyrhythm in there? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think there might be something in like 5/4 or 6/4 or like 6/8 or something like that. And that bass is in 4/4 and the drums are in 4/4 as well. We're a lot less hesitant about bringing in that percussion groove. This is definitely meant to be something a little bit more easy to follow along to, a little bit less ambient. Nice. Has a nice bum bum bum. It's triplets, isn't it? Which is a spicy choice. It's almost like it would make more sense rhythmically if it was dun 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 dun, kind of like working with sort of dotted 8ths into a 16th at the end or something like that, or dotted 8ths into an 8th at the end, but we're going bum 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 bum. It's great. We clearly understand our music theory and our you know, rhythm theory and all that to a medium to high level. And the fact that we're bringing in higher layers now and swirling around the headphones is evidence that we do get how to develop tracks and ideas and make them get to work for this form factor. Like, we don't even need vocals at this point. It's more just kind of like a take of accepting what we've been given and just kind of vibing with it. And actually, I don't necessarily mind there being a click for a snare. I think actual snare drum would have been too kind of thick sounding for this. Something with a short release, short decay, bit thinner, just kind of pierce through the mix. Nice, letting go of that filter. Great. And I can't tell whether that's a deliberate, I mean, of course it'd be deliberate, but like I wonder whether they recorded the MIDI for these and then this kind of like, no, they would have used the filter on the actual synth itself. I think that these kind of piano-ish kind of keys are coming on the 2. Because if they were halfway through a beat, they'd just clash horrifically with the triplet note bass accents. And they just consistently they consistently go from left to right in the headphones as well. Almost like it's a something orbiting you, or you're orbiting someone, or something. I mean, like when you listen to this, could you imagine traveling above the dust storms? Yep, it's great. We had a space here without something moving us forward. We're left into the ambient, floating in the ether, and then it just kind of kicks in. No complaints. Which, to be fair, they do often. It's a pretty sort of like stereotypical or like stylistic, like it's a faux pas to not have ebbs and flows in this type of music. But considering how, almost, movie soundtrack the start of this album was, we're getting some more sort of like traditional styles of composition here, and I think that's great to have that range there. It shows the kind of the best parts of everything involved. And back to the the rotation there. It totally does sound like it's going around your headphones. That's some fantastic dimensionality to the studio production. I'm not really sure what I could want from here more than what I've already provided, because I feel as if we've given enough to allow there to be no filler through the track. We've instantiated the thing that we've moved on and sort of built on over time. I would be surprised if we had another long form track like this after this though. I feel like we need like a break from the longer ones just to have a little bit of a rinse. But you could definitely vibe to this. We'll start going over the dust storms for sure. Interesting choice. We've had a few of those fade outs now. I don't usually have it more than once in a row, let alone 3. But no shade.
What is your name? George.
Cleaning machines talking again.
I like that name.
Me too.
How are you?
I tell you good.
You didn't.
So what am I doing?
Using internet time.
That sounds cool.
Which should I do?
Do my homework.
What's your homework?
Write about a poem.
Write your own poem.
Write me an essay. You robot.
That's right. Write me a poem.
No, you write me a poem.
Roses are red, violets are blue.
Yes.
How do you know?
I just do. I know all things.
So you're the architect?
No.
So I'm assuming this is splitting it in half. This is the intelligence of the robots that they have at this point between the upper and lower registers there.
Yes, you are.
How do you know that?
I guess.
Good guess.
Thanks.
It's great hearing AIs
welcome.
talk to each
Are
other.
you a-
Never.
That is a lie.
Just
Oh, well.
just having everything kind of cut out there. The silence, never. Then that is a lie there. Great dramatic phrasing. Yeah, I suppose to be fair, it's just noise at this point, isn't it? Monstrification of the vocal takes. Files is wonderful. It's kind of crazy to think how much AI has changed things, and when they talk to each other, they sound like complete dullards, don't they? It's like you're getting taken further and further away from the cleaning machines having this conversation. It's just going into a void of nothingness. Apart from that higher emphasis kind of pad there. Very haunting, you know? We'll get a longer one now. Tunnel City Morning Drive, track number 7. What are we going to do differently for here? Like, how are we going to extend it beyond what we've had previously? Yep, spacey synths for that chord note groove again. Cool. The kick, snare, hi-hats. It's kind of like the Old Faithful at this point. That stab there between the kicks and snares is wonderful. Adding a little bit of personality, a little bit of sassiness there, and the leveling of it in the mix is great too. It's not too loud, not too quiet. Yeah, this is more traditional from what I've heard from Pravi Lopov. Except without the vocal chops. Or the vocal lines. I'm wondering what this has to do with the original theme though. I can kind of understand the idea of the robots talking to each other within this album, because you can imagine robots to be involved maybe up in the higher registers. I'm assuming that the Tunnel City Morning Drive is metaphorical for something else. Oh no, Tunnel City Morning Drive. So because they're underneath the earth, right? Because it's so polluted. I remember. So this is talking kind of like The Seeker in the Dark, you know, like the parallel of that. Resonance to the voice in that lower range as well. I do like how clarity the vocal takes, regardless of how they're processed. Kind of honestly sounds like a horror film there, like a cyberpunk horror film. But you just can't help but nod your head to it. Boom, 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 boom. And again, having that layer on top there, that synth going left and right in the stereo field. It's one of those things where, like, if you didn't have it rotating, it would just be static in the center. You couldn't get away with that. There is a sense of having like fewer elements but having them do more that I like about this album. Yeah, it's great just to have the filtered snares here, to have just the floatiness of that. Whilst the synths get more and more kind of like twisted and scuffed. That kind of ride in the stereo field. It is unnerving. I think there's another polyrhythm going on. Dun 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 dun. That kind of knots as well with what's going on with the quarter note hits of those percussive parts of the drums. And long notes on the other side, legato. Different rhythms across the entire stereo field. It's beautiful though, those pads are filling out that mid-high range really well. There's been a lot in this track though. I am looking, at this point of the album, for something new to happen, to pop up. More context for the Hey Driver part. You know, not knowing where they are. Are they driving themselves? Do they literally have another driver? How does the underground society work? Is this meant to replicate the feeling of going on that drive? So it's more about the constant question of not knowing where you are as opposed to trying to find resolution within that. Maybe the driver is lost as well. Maybe the driver is the robots that were arguing with each other, you know? Really simple bass riff, but the rhythm of it, along with rolling with that flat second Phrygian mode, is enough. The offbeat hi-hat grooves, they just keep moving it forward. They make it sound complete. I'm not sure I would have loved for there to have been like another like lead element. I feel like you could have had like some sort of key solo on top of this or something like that. There could have been something else just a little more colorful within this potentially. Because I'm not sure why you wouldn't, because I'm not necessarily understanding why we wanted to have the lead elements the same throughout. Even if there are various sort of interpretations amidst there with a little bit of kind of the scuffed kind of there's a polyrhythm. That's a musical idea. I'm just not sure there like was, if it was almost too naked, that we could have had something else come in that space and kind of, especially if you're going to start with the drums early on, just have, you know, have something else come in and be a little bit more kind of like perky and maybe have that harmonized on top of the vocals or something like that. But that was Tunnel City Morning Drive. We got Itinerant Preachers in the Black Desert. That'd be feisty, wouldn't it? Black Desert, man. I was wondering if we were going to get some sort of response. It's very depressing, isn't it, really? The soft kind of fuzzy kind of like response from the ether. They sound demented. It's very unsettling, isn't it? So they're German? It's very uncomfortable listening to this. The anguish. I wasn't expecting to get a speech. I was not expecting that, to be honest. You can hear other people talking in the background. It's like you're surrounded by the people within that situation. There's just this space where you're just hearing the screaming, the angst, the fury, the madness. Just screaming into the ether. Like the delay and reverb chains are wild. You just don't know what's going to happen next. I think it's done. I think it's over now. You never want to meet those people. You never want to meet those preachers. We got Bodies and Strobe Lights. Track number 9 for today, as I understand it. Not one I regret, obviously. I enjoy listening to Pravi Lopov's music. While I obviously try to avoid any bias. Oh, that's a scratchy sound in my ear. I'm not really sure if I like that, though. That's unusual. Bodies and Strobe Lights, what does that even mean? Does this have something to do with the speech we heard before that was in German? Again, it's just a fantastic use of the first minute of a track trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And the robot voice. Oh, wasn't expecting that. I was not expecting another polyrhythm with the sub bass. That was great. That was a great fake out because I expected it was. I expected it to be kind of like that, but no, we had a polyrhythm with the chord notes. You could rave to this. And so I wouldn't be surprised if people were raving to it, to be honest. It's a track that fit well into DJ sets. Are we referring to like going to a rave or a concert like that? Is that the kind of vibe that we're getting from this? Bouncing bodies, strobe and lights. Love we seek, God we find. Because if that's the case, that's a pretty slick way to start a track. It's the 9th one though. Is that the point of unity for the various people within this track? And pause? What's happening? It stopped. You got me. That's so clever. Just have everything stop. Let it catch you by surprise. Make you wonder what's happening next. If you have the continuity, person gets lost in it and then you suck him out of it. We're clearly very comfortable within the genre at this point, and I think that this is some of the best stuff I've heard from it within my time doing reviews. Yeah, with an addition to some sort of like China cymbals, the kind of gongish kind of, you know. Oh no, those are ride cymbals. We've got some ride cymbals, very quiet ones with a delay tail on them or reverb tail on them. Yeah, no complaints at all. Honestly, you can just bop your head for this. Stuff like this works well not only for a concept album, but just as a general track within a mix. Like, this is like similar in quality. Like, it's up there with a lot of the stuff that I've worked with my DJ students and stuff like that. Because you could easily put this into a mix and make it work as long as you had the correct key signature and stuff like that. You just need to figure out tracks that will pair with it and just find appropriate genres, but there's a bit of stuff for everyone, you know, which I appreciate. There's enough to get told a story from the album and everything like that, but there's also enough to just be able to enjoy it for some of the bangers. But you do get a little bit more kind of utility out of this from listening via headphones, I suppose, because you can specifically hear stuff swirling around this frequency spectrum like or stereo field, like with these synths on the right side. Yeah, I think a lot of the strength of this is that it has these notes kind of working in different phrasings, time signature wise. Maybe they're polymeters. Is it polymeters potentially? Potentially polymeters, where everything feels connected because things are separate, but they all are within a similar key signature, and the textures niche together well. And after enough of it, you just kind of accept it's happening. And back, you know, to having that vocal refrain here that we had initially to tie the track together. It's wild that like we're almost 8 minutes have passed. It's crazy that we managed to make that time fly. That's almost 3 tracks on certain genre standards, you know. I have songs that come in that 2.5 to 3 minutes. You know, that is 3 of those. It's an entire half of an EP for some people. And to me, at least, is equally as fascinating. Granted, it's a bit of a listen for someone who's maybe new to the work, but then you have the Flying City and Seeker in the Dark to start off the album with, which are lighter affairs. Also, it should be noted that like I think Model and Warrior are shorter than most of these long form tracks, so you don't have to worry about kind of getting too like kind of stuck into them. Like they're not going to suffocate and overwhelm you. You're gonna figure out 8.5 minutes is gone when it's gone. We've got the last track for today though, Down Here in the Mud, track number 10. And it's a short one, 2:44. Wild. I've enjoyed my time with this album, to be fair. Sounds like wind swirling around. Like a barren wasteland, you know? People shouting in the distance, you know, a bit of Foley there. Very, very unsettling. It's like we're in a spaceship passing by the people as they sing. Is that it? It's wild. The spatial awareness of the mix. Like, this is really complicated studio production to get it to kind of move around like that. They're saying your beginner's first automation session as passing by someone singing out on their lonesome. And then into more nothingness. And that's it. That's the album. It just fades out. It just fades out. Wow. Crazy. because this is the conclusion of my review of this album, Forsaken 3000 by Pravi Lopov. Hopefully the previous section with the edits and stuff like that made sense. I'm going to talk about what I think this album was about. I mean, we've already spoken about it because I mentioned the excerpt, the blurb, at the lower part of the page. The politicians living in a spaceship, and but talking about like the people who lived in the tunnels underneath and stuff like that, and the difference between their lives. And I think that it does kind of communicate that. You get the feeling with tracks like the Flying City and all that, traveling above the dust storms. Like, it almost seems like they're in like a fantasy world, but they don't necessarily feel like everything's okay, and I don't think it's fair, but they're also in a position where they're privileged, and they definitely want to go down there. Bodies and Strobe Lights, I think it's just they dance up there. They just dance up there, and they enjoy themselves and have fun, and it's just finding God and pleasure and everything like that up there. And it's just basically just their life as one big rave. And then down the bottom, you've just got people trying to find their way through the tunnels, getting yelled at by manic preachers, and people just singing out of misery and loneliness and struggle. It does describe it really well. I think that we managed to find a good midpoint between having a story told through Foley and sort of almost cinematic kind of sound, like a soundtrack, like with the stories being told, the sing, etc. The like, including stuff happening with like the cleaning machines talking in, whereas the AI talking to each other and discussing stuff. But it's also what we had going on with just the general tracks, like Seeker in the Light, Traveling Above the Dust Storms, Tunnel City, Morning Drive, and then Body and Strobe Lights. We had like tracks where there were those kind of quarter note grooves there with the kicks, the snares, the synths, the basses, etc. Very simple ideas, but that like were repeated enough to get you lost in it. Then they'd take something away. Then they'd come back and put something new in. There was enough range in here within this album to keep people interested in the music Pravi Lopov makes, but also that it makes sense within the context of the album, the story that's presented. There's still a little bit of mystery to it. Like, I am wondering if I understood German, for example, if the itinerant preachers in the Black Desert would make more sense to me. But that could also be maybe not the case. But look, either way, I'm happy with what this album was, and I think that I get kind of the world they're making there, and for the most part, it's good. I think that the vocals, we didn't have singing in this necessarily. It was more like modulated sort of parts of like, well, we had the AI talking in number 6, but then we had people discussing things like in the Flying City with pleasure, and everything's white and glowing, but it still doesn't feel right. We had Seeker in the dark, their eyes hurting because of the sandstorms, being unable to see and stuff like that. The Tunnel City Morning Drive asking the driver where they were because they had no idea because it was so dark. Seeker in the Light, I couldn't figure out what was going on there. I'm wondering if it was someone saying, what if we could get you up there or something like that? Like, what if things were better? Example, what if we could get a break from this? It was maybe a false hope or something like that. And down here in the mud, I think it was just people talking about how like they were just struggling and life in the mud was brutal, but I may have missed some nuance there. That's why you can listen to these tracks again and again. Like, if you wanted to hear the whole tracks in their entirety, feel free to go and check out the Bandcamp of Pravi Lopov. I'll put a link in the description of the video. But yeah, look, it's good. The vocals were well done. I enjoyed the modulation on it. I enjoyed the various effects we had, the way we affected the sound or the tuning or the metatune or whatever of those vocals as well, because we had filtering of those. They'd get like maybe more high or low edge. They're a bit more sort of like demented, as opposed, with the AIs, where they had further harmonization on top of their traditional voices there to kind of make it sound more demonic and kind of like kind of absurd. And there was creativity there for the most part. There was also little bits of panning of the vocals as well, going around the headphones as if you were like listening to the person talking from a point like you were traveling past them. So it was very creative and very effective. The tracks, for the most part, you had lots of different lengths of track. You kind of had two types of song within this album. The first type of song within this album was more of a shorter form, kind of like, it's like an atmosphere. You had like bits of wind foley, like voices, maybe occasional synth parts for like drama, such as in the Flying City. But most of the time you kind of just had like emptiness and like the occasional sound of something. A Short Time Rift at 2 p.m. was more of an instrumental piece on the keys there that was very much a solo piece by itself, and it carried itself really well and really elegantly. I think that on the other side of things, you had tracks that were nice and full sounding with like basses again and drums, like always like stabs or whatever, and then synths, and kind of lots of polyrhythms and lots of or polymeters, different phrasings of instrumental parts that came in and out and never felt too overused. Like I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was Traveling Above the Dust Storms, on other tracks we would like have the initial kind of like drop or the main sort of big kind of doofy bit, and we'd put like an additional synth on top or something like that in the gap, and we just have that kind of like repeat itself, or we'd have the vocals that were at the start come back over top of it to kind of like build it up and keep it more interesting. And other times we'd just stop it at a point where we got lost in it and they'd kind of snap us out of it. Synth would come from the right side to the left or whatever. There was constant efforts to keep the listener engaged. I think part of that is because these are long form attractive tracks, but also because I think we wanted to give an equal experience to people listening through headphones who are like more sort of like active listening like me, and also to people who are in clubs like raving and they were just enjoying the doof of the music, you know, the chord note vibes, the grooves there. And I think we had an amount of complexity to the track that was not just root notes and like itinerations of like the triads there. We had some extensions in the harmonies of the key parts in a short time riff at 2 p.m, which showed that we understood how to have more complexity emotionally to a piece. But I think we also had a like less going on in some of these compositions, even when things were relatively heavier, in part due to the fact we just want people to focus on the rhythm and get sort of swamped and kind of like we left a lot of space in a longer form track to add more later on. So I think that was why there was a relative sense of minimalism. I've said that a lot in this review, but I think it was smart composition there. Whether the track was short or long, it was engaging. Again, the shorter tracks were typically either kind of like more like kind of statement pieces where it was someone talking or describing stuff, or it was like the robots, or it was like the Down in the Mud one. And they were sort of like bits of context for the plot of the album. And then the longer form factor ones were more sort of like people within that space, kind of whether they're on top of the dust clouds or in the middle of like it's good. There was a nice balance between the two here, and I'm glad we found a point. We found a midpoint between having functional tracks that you can use in like DJ sets and performance stuff like that, and an actual concept album overall. So that was great. You know, a good sense of unison between the various elements here. Clearly we understand how to use synthesizers to like the nth degree. We have a phenomenal understanding of how to get the tones and stuff we need. I'm very impressed with the different sounds there. That's not necessarily a studio production thing. This is recording synths, you know, but it's also having the synths at the right settings, adjusting the filtering and like their oscillation rates and stuff, having different kind of points and layering. It's knowing how to make your own synth sounds, and we clearly understand how to not only do that but also mess with them and adjust them as we perform. And I'm very, very impressed with that. Just a shout out to that as well. I understand how difficult it is, and we nailed it. To make your own, I mean, like a lot of people use presets, but like to make your own synth settings from scratch, especially using analog synths, is very difficult. So I wouldn't be surprised if we're using analog stuff, and that's fantastic. And if we're using digital stuff, that's cool too. Or if we're using presets, that's cool too. It's just, to me, it sounds like we could well have been making our own from scratch and using analog hardware. So either way, it's fine. The recording, mixing, and mastering was splendid. I loved the amount of dynamic range within this album. The recordings were phenomenal. It was great to have that depth there. The panning of the various instruments, vocal elements, and other bits of foley there was phenomenal, fantastic as well. There was great sense of dimensionality to it, like lots of depth to the sublayers versus the mains. Panning around the space there, it really was a 3D experience. And I also enjoyed the filtering and notching and cueing of the various points, whether it was the vocals or the drums or the basses or the synths or anything else, pianos, keys. Everything was leveled really, really well, really elegantly. There was only one part where I was like, could we have come in heavier then? But I was like, no, that's a deliberate decision because I know how well they handled the sub bass. And when you're not second guessing them because you know how well they do their thing, that's when you know you've got an act that's proven themselves. And I'm really impressed. Fantastic. I've got no real complaints about studio production at all, actually. I could hear everything clearly. I know I talked about like Seeker in the Light, not being able to understand the word step. I think that was just more of maybe just a general me not being able to sort of like, if they'd been raw takes, yeah, but I think it was a deliberate decision to make them a little more sort of like mysterious, and that's fine. It's just me being like honest about it. I couldn't understand all the words there, but I could hear almost everything else. And you know, everything was leveled really well. It was nice and loud without pumping, and effectively this is my review of Forsaken 3000 by Pravi Lopov. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show us some love via the various social medias and their Bandcamp page. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as either hell more than ever with all the crazy stuff going on in the world, and I will catch you in the next review. Spiderhands Out.